Namaskar. Well, friends, I heartily welcome you all to Bhim Bhashya, my audio video podcast series on Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. This audio video podcast series has 54 short speeches on Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, unraveling as many as 25 different dimensions of his multifaceted genius. Friends, this podcast series is focused on Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. His thoughts, his actions, his philosophy, and above all, the grand vision that he had for our nation as a whole. That is what this podcast series is all about. So let's move on to episode 16. Let's continue our discussion of Dr. Ambedkar as a political strategist, part 2. In this episode 16, I'm going to talk about the direct confrontation between Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar and Mahatma Gandhi at the second Roundtable Conference. As discussed in the last episode, Mahatma Gandhi and the Indian National Congress did not participate in the first Roundtable Conference, which was held in November 1930. But the political situation started changing rapidly in January 1931. On January 26th, 1931, there was a pact between Mahatma Gandhi and the then Viceroy Lord Irwin. Under the pact, Gandhiji was released from the jail, and in return, Gandhiji agreed to withdraw the civil disobedience movement and also withdraw his boycott of the Round Table Conference. The second Round Table Conference began on September 7, 1931, and it was in this session that Dr. Ambedkar came on head-on collision with Mahatma Gandhi. While participating in the deliberations of the Federal Structure Committee, Dr. Ambedkar had consistently emphasized an all-inclusiveness of democracy through direct elections. Dr. Ambedkar had said, and I quote, "Unless every citizen is made to feel that it is he who can make or unmake the government, we shall never be able to succeed in establishing the true foundations of a responsible government in India." Unquote. Regarding the minorities, Dr. Ambedkar said, and I quote, "The minorities in India are not only anxious to have their interests and their communities represented in various legislatures, but they are also insistent on getting a certain minimum quantum of representation." Unquote. Dr. Ambedkar made it abundantly clear that he wanted, and I quote him, "the depressed classes to be treated as a separate community for political purposes, in the same way as the Mohammedans and the Christians are treated." Unquote. They must have the same right of representation, not only in the provincial legislative councils, but also in both houses of the central legislature. That is what Dr. Ambedkar said. This was an extremely important strategic statement which was going to create an unprecedented political turmoil in our country. Speaking in the same committee on September 15, 1931, Mahatma Gandhi argued that the Congress represents all the interests and classes, including the Muslims and the depressed classes. According to Gandhiji, Congress represented the depressed classes because removal of untouchability was a facet of the political platform of the Congress party. Gandhiji claimed that since he was the sole representative of the Congress, it followed that he was the sole representative of the Indian nation as well. Mahatma Gandhi, speaking in the same committee the next day, emphasized, he said, quote, the Congress had reconciled itself to special treatment of the Hindu-Muslim-Sikh tangle. There are sound historical reasons for it, but the Congress will not extend that doctrine, unquote. Gandhiji clarified his position. I quote him again, the interests of untouchable are dear to the Congress, and I would strongly resist, I repeat, I would strongly resist any further special representation to the depressed classes, unquote. In spite of Gandhiji's opposition to special interest for depressed classes, Dr. Ambedkar refrained from responding then and there. Why? Because the subject was going to come up in the minorities subcommittee, which was scheduled to meet on September 28, 1931. In the meantime, Gandhiji's son, Devdas, organized a one-on-one meeting of the two great leaders, Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, and this happened on September 26, 1931. The second meeting in person also proved to be completely futile. Dr. Ambedkar elaborated his position for nearly 3 hours, while Gandhiji listened quietly, spinning the wheel. Gandhiji's unwillingness to respond explicitly disturbed Dr. Ambedkar very much. He later described it as a Chanakya Niti. Gandhiji first spoke in Minorities Committee on October 1st, 1931. Gandhiji informed the committee that he had held meetings with various minority leaders, but no compromise could be reached, and that he needed more time for informal consultations to solve the so-called communal problem. Gandhiji called for the adjournment of the meeting, which was agreed. Gandhiji and Dr. Ambedkar came face to face in the next sitting of the Minorities Committee, which was on October 8, 1931, and all hell broke loose. Gandhiji admitted that his informal negotiations with Muslims, Sikh, and other minority leaders had failed. He therefore moved for an adjournment of the meeting sine die. But before concluding his intervention, Gandhiji blamed the failure on the composition of the Indian delegation. He said the delegates, and I quote, were almost all not the elected representatives of the parties or groups whom they were presumed to represent. This was resented by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar's reply was sharp and hard-hitting. He pointed out that instead of confining himself to his own proposal for adjournment, Gandhiji started casting aspersions upon the delegates that they were nominees of the government and they did not represent the views of their respective communities. Dr. Ambedkar emphatically added, and I quote him, I have not the slightest doubt that even if the depressed classes of India were given a chance of electing their representatives to this conference, I would all the same find a place for myself. Unquote. Dr. Ambedkar continued, he said, and I quote again, whether I am a nominee or not, I fully represent the claims of my community and let no man be under any mistaken impression. Unquote. Then Dr. Ambedkar launched a frontal attack on Gandhiji. He said, and I quote, the Mahatma has always been claiming that the Congress stands for depressed classes. I can only say that it is one of many false claims which irresponsible people go on making. Unquote. Dr. Ambedkar insisted that if the British government wanted to transfer the power, it should be, quote, accompanied by such conditions that the power shall not fall in the hands of a clique, unquote. Dr. Ambedkar continued, and I quote, the solution shall be such that power shall be shared by all communities in their respective proportions, unquote. Before the last meeting of the Minorities Committee, leading representatives of the Muslims, depressed classes, and other minorities, they came together and they submitted a memorandum stating special claims of the Muslims, Christians, the depressed classes, Anglo-Indians, and so on. And this Minorities Pact was done keeping Mahatma Gandhi out. And this pact enraged Mahatma Gandhi. In the last meeting of the Minorities Committee, Mahatma Gandhi gave vent to his emotions. He said, and I quote Mahatma Gandhi, I can understand the claims advanced by other minorities, but the claims advanced on behalf of the untouchables, that to me is the unkindest cut of all. Unquote. Mahatma Gandhi said, and I quote him again, I claim that if there was a referendum of the untouchables, I would get their vote and I would top the poll. Unquote. In the course of his uncharacteristically strongly worded speech, Mahatma Gandhi maintained that Dr. Ambedkar's, and I quote, bitter experiences in life has warped his judgment, unquote. In the same speech, Gandhiji firmly asserted, I do not mind untouchables if they so desire being converted to Islam or to Christianity. I should tolerate that. But I cannot tolerate what is in store for Hinduism if there are two divisions set forth at the village level. Unquote. Mahatma Gandhi added, and I quote, I want to say with all emphasis that I can command that if I was the only person to resist this thing, that is, division within Hinduism, I would resist it with my life. Unquote. And as the fate would have it, his words actually proved to be prophetic. Merely 4 days after the acrimonious exchange, Dr. Ambedkar wrote a letter to Times of India. The date was 12th October, making serious allegation against Mahatma Gandhi. The Muslims had their charter of demands known as 14 points. Dr. Ambedkar alleged that while negotiating with the Muslim leaders, Gandhiji has agreed to the Muslim demands but on one condition. And I quote him, they should oppose the claims of the depressed classes and the smaller minorities. Unquote. Gandhiji's conduct was, Dr. Ambedkar said, unbecoming of a Mahatma and to be expected only from an inveterate opponent of the depressed classes. Mr. Gandhi, please note that Dr. Ambedkar never called him Mahatma. Mr. Gandhi, he said, is not only not playing the part of a friend of the depressed classes, but he is not even playing the part of a honest foe. Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Ambedkar both went away deeply hurt. Mahatma Gandhi called it the most humiliating day of my life, while Dr. Ambedkar argued that Congress could not have chosen a worse person to guide the destiny of our nation. Dr. Ambedkar said, and I quote him, as a unifying force, he was a failure. Mr. Gandhi presents himself as a man full of humility, but his behavior at the Roundtable Conference showed that he could be, quote unquote, very petty minded, unquote. The second Roundtable Conference ended in a stalemate. It created a lot of bitterness between Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Ambedkar. According to Dr. Ambedkar, inside the Roundtable Conference, Gandhiji's defense was that the Hindus had seriously taken up the cause of the untouchables and therefore there was no reason to give them political safeguards. According to Dr. Ambedkar, outside the Roundtable Conference, Mahatma Gandhi argued, and I quote, what is needed is destruction of untouchability. For achieving that goal, Gandhiji suggested as an alternative to separate electorates, the upper caste doing penance for having neglected untouchables for ages. That penance can be done by active social reform, Gandhiji said, and by making the lot of untouchables more bearable by acts of service, unquote. Before the second Roundtable Conference was adjourned, the delegate members of the Minority Committee accepted the proposal of the British Prime Minister to submit a signed requisition authorizing him to arbitrate and give his decision on the communal problem. Interestingly, while most delegates, including Mahatma Gandhi, signed the requisition, Dr. Ambedkar refused to sign. The communal award, when announced, was going to create an unprecedented turmoil in the whole country. Well, friends, let's conclude this session here today. In the next episode, that is episode 17, we will see how the conflict unfolded further, finally ending up with a truce, although momentarily. So long, friends, until we meet again real soon. But before I leave, let me request you, if you like this audio video podcast series, please like it, share it, and subscribe to it. Thank you. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.